Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Transformation and the Competitive Edge. This is part one of a four-part series on quantifying DevOps outcomes. My name is Jamie Bright, and I'm pleased to introduce today's chef speaker, George Miranda. George will be your technical strategy guide for this series. But before I turn it over to George, I have a couple of housekeeping items to cover quickly. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on demand after the live session, and it's accessible through the same link you're using now. We'd also love to hear from you during today's interactive presentation. Throughout this webinar, we'll prompt you with poll questions like the one we're pushing live right now, asking, is your company or organization currently undergoing a DevOps transformation initiative? Go ahead and send your response to that now, and we'll discuss the results throughout the webinar. We've also dedicated time at the end of this presentation to answer your questions, so please feel free to send those along at any time using the Ask a Question tab beneath your presentation screen. For those of you just joining, welcome to today's presentation, Digital Transformation and the Competitive Edge. Let's go ahead and get started. George, why don't you kick us off by telling our audience a bit more about yourself and what we'll be covering here today.
Thanks, Jamie. So as Jamie mentioned, we're going to have a few polls today that help us gauge where you are with a DevOps transformation initiative. Unlike our previous webinars, this series aims to be more interactive and perhaps a bit less technical than you're used to hearing from chefs. This series is aimed at managers and executives that have questions around how to achieve success in DevOps, and it's also aimed at those who would like to engage further to tie technology initiatives to direct business outcomes that give you a competitive edge in today's marketplace. So the poll questions that we're putting out will help me figure out how to tailor today's conversation and which questions to focus on as we explore not only today's content, but the content of future webinars in this series. So if you haven't yet responded, please take a minute to do so. There will be a few questions today, and I will point them out as they come up and we make these polls live. And while you're doing that, I should go ahead and introduce myself. My name is George Miranda. I help set the direction of technical strategy here at Chef. If you've worked with Chef in the past, you know that we're a highly technical company, whether you're engaged with engineering or all the way up at the executive level. I myself am an engineer by background, but I've also helped a number of our customers with their own transformation initiatives throughout the years. And that's exactly what we're here to cover in this series. So how did that transformation play out for you? What concerns do you have? How can you take tangible steps to work through those concerns? Those are some of the questions we want to look at throughout this series. But just in case you'd like to continue the conversation further, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter after today's webinar if we don't have time to get to your specific concerns. With that, let's go ahead and look at some of our poll results. It's clear that many of our participants are already engaged in DevOps transformation initiatives, which is great because we can look at how to better gauge if we're moving in the right direction. And let's see. Great. We have another poll question as well, asking you to rank how your IT organization performs today. That last measure is interesting because we now have industry data that helps us orient where companies perform today in objective ways. And we're going to cover that throughout most of this series in later webinars. Today, however, we're going to focus on gaining a competitive edge. The poll results pretty much speak for themselves, though. Digital transformation is here, so I'm not going to belabor this point. It's clear that you know that. This is the market that we operate in today, right? Disrupt or be disrupted. The only dimension that matters in today's marketplace is speed, right? How do you minimize the time between initial business idea and shipping that to your users? Disruptors are able to disrupt because they're very good at shipping software quickly and responding to the needs of a fickle or unpredictable market. And those disruptors are able to stay ahead of their users by doing that. They're able to stay ahead of increasing workloads, and they're able to do it because they're able to move fast. So here's the real question. how does the business move at that kind of speed while still delivering excellence, right? In other words, how do you capitalize on disruption rather than being disrupted? And if you look at companies that have achieved that goal, you see that none of them have gotten there without automation. That's true across Chef's own user base, but it's also true across multiple industry verticals. And just in case you're not already familiar with us, Chef is a leader in terms of automation trends. We're an open source company, and we maintain 3 automation engines that speak to the needs of 70% of the Fortune 500. We provide Chef, our namesake, for infrastructure automation, Inspect for compliance automation, and Habitat for automating modern applications such as those living in containers and microservices. We provide commercial value atop of those open source projects, and in a recent Goldman Sachs spending intentions report, we were the only private company to appear on the list of vendors strategic to large enterprises. Chef also maintains a number of key partnership alliances that align with technology you're probably already using. So here at Chef, we're all too familiar with some of the challenges that you're probably already experiencing today. And why is digital transformation challenging? It's for a few reasons, but in part, it's because hybrid is the new operating model. The challenge, again, is to ship software faster, safer, and more reliably. But the reality is that most of us are doing that across a wide swath of technologies and landscapes. Now, there's a body of practices that can help shift our mindset to prepare for that model, whether it's agile or lean manufacturing or DevOps. There are cultural patterns that we can adopt to help with that. But when we apply those patterns in our organizations, we're also caught in several other mind shifts along the way, right? We're shifting from data centers to the cloud. Some of us are still shifting from physical to virtual machines. And on top of that, we're also now shifting from monolithic architectures to microservices and containers. And many of us are managing all of those shifts at the same time. And even for those that have made the shift, what we see is that not all of our applications migrate or change shape. Where we end up, after all of those trends, is we end up in environments with a very high degree of heterogeneity. And we like to think that these technology shifts are going to deliver simplicity and fix all of our problems, if only we could move everything into this new model. But again, the reality is that most enterprises are going to operate in hybrid mode for many years to come. And as technology continues to evolve faster, that heterogeneity is only going to continue to get more colorful. So any solution that you embrace must have that heterogeneity in mind at its core in order for you to achieve success. So that's the technology challenge. But there's a second and an equally important challenge that is less based in technology and is entirely based in culture. And that challenge is the tension faced between IT services organizations and lines of business that are pushing to ship software faster. IT operations groups are typically focused on mitigating risk. Right? It's their job to ensure application stability, make sure that our applications are always available, make sure they're secure, and make sure that we don't have to think about it because the lights are always on. Whereas developers are focused on increasing speed, right? Ship ideas faster. So developers have used things like PaaS solutions to bypass cumbersome IT processes for the sake of speed. And when they do, they potentially introduce management complexity and compliance issues. And it's this tension that we see across most organizations, right? The tension between speed and risk. And here at Chef, what we have found is that organizations that are able to successfully transform do so by realigning priorities with vertical integration, all the way from the customer through business, through development, and through operations. And organizations that go through digital transformation successfully end up reimagining what these teams should do and which priorities they should speak to. That means that modern application teams organize in ways that allow them to build, deploy, manage, and collaborate on infrastructure and apps on any platform, in any format, with increasing speed, improved efficiency, and with decreasing risk. And that type of reorganization is what we here at Chef refer to as creating a developer services organization, right? That's the cultural challenge. Well, what that means is that along with the technical shift that occurs, there's a shift in how we measure traditional IT metrics. When we dig into what a successful transformation is about, what we see is that it means diving into the capabilities needed to deliver on business requirements, right? Rather than focusing on the needs of our own teams and divisions, which we saw in the earlier slide ultimately serve to create friction and tension that slows us down, the right thing to do is to create a shared developer services team. And that team can reinvigorate their offerings to match our business needs by focusing on tackling the problems of efficiency and risk while orienting towards speed and measuring predictable outcomes. And it's that type of clear direction that enables line of business teams to deliver ideas as software faster, safer, and more reliably than before, right? So the organizational challenge is figuring out how we get there. And that's a lot of challenge, right? When we start looking at it, that takes a lot of work. But we do that and we adopt these transformation initiatives because companies that have managed to transform have shown that they outperform their peers in some pretty remarkable ways. When we look across the industry, data shows that these high-performing digital leaders also turn in stronger financial performance, right? They have higher revenue growth. They have greater profitability. They have greater returns to shareholders. They have greater market share than their low-performing counterparts. And what's interesting is when we start digging into these stats even further, what we see is that these high-performing digital leaders also excel in other areas that have perhaps less tangible benefits, like lower rates of technical debt, which leads developers to spend more time focused on creative work, which leads to higher employee satisfaction ratings, which means higher rates of retention and successful recruiting. And what we see is this virtuous cycle that results from a cohesive set of practices that together enable this type of outperformance. But what does that really mean, right? What does it really mean for a business to outperform? How do we know when we're there? Or how do we even know when we're moving in the right direction, right? The question is, what business outcomes matter and what are the metrics that we can use to support those outcomes in that level of outperformance? And it's those outcomes that we're going to focus on throughout the course of this series. So as we've said earlier, the goal for transformation is reducing the time from idea to ship. And you do that with a vertically integrated team where the unit of value is your applications and the currency is being able to ship changes quickly without compromising efficiency or increasing risk, right? And so it's these outcomes, increased speed, improved efficiency, and decreased risk, that are a way to think about what it is you need to deliver. And so these distinctions they're a little bit arbitrary because when you dig into the metrics, you could easily argue that all of these metrics are part of the same concern. Like all of these metrics relate to speed, they all relate to efficiency, and they all relate to risk. And if you said that to me, you'd be absolutely correct. The thing to note about these outcomes and metrics is that they measure a cohesive set of practices. When we look at companies that outperform their peers, those companies excel in all of these categories, not just in some. So the earlier outperformance metrics for revenue growth and profitability and so forth are correlated with organizations that master these skills. In order to have a competitive edge, these are the areas in which you need to focus. But we make this arbitrary distinction between, which ones to focus on, because when you think about transformation, it's usually pretty difficult to eat the whole bowl all at once, right? You need to outperform in all of these categories. But a way to get started is to choose one and really dig in there. You start making strides in that area. And when you do, what you'll quickly notice is that the other metrics and skills are interrelated as a necessary part of your overall practice. So the general pattern that we see here and the things you should be focusing on is how frequently can you do a thing that is essential to shipping software? And then when components of accomplishing that thing become critical, how much time do you need to resolve things back into a working state? And so for these next few slides, I'm going to ask you to participate in yet another poll. And we're going to look at how these measures apply to our own organization. So you should see another poll that's live that asks us to look at how we perform today when we're thinking about speed. So the measures here are how frequently you deploy software and how long does it take for software features that are committed to your code base to be running in production. We then see measures that put us in either a high, medium, or low performing category. So go ahead and answer the poll if you haven't already. And what we're doing here is we're using industry standard metrics, most of which come from the State of DevOps report, as a measure of where you stand today. So looking at speed, we see distinctions between high, medium, and low performing organizations. High performers are able to ship on demand. Whenever they have a new change that should be in the hands of their users, right, they can deploy that whenever they want. Medium performers measure that amount of time in days or in weeks. And low performing organizations measure that time in months. So how often do you deploy changes to your production application? The other metric here is the time elapsed between when you have a fully baked feature committed to source control and when that feature has been deployed to production. So in your organization today, when a developer commits a new feature into your code base, what unit of time do you use to measure how long it took you to see value from that work? Do you measure it in minutes? Is it days or weeks? Is it months, right? Where are you today? Where do you want to be? We're going to look at these results in a moment. There's another poll question here asking you to rate how you perform in terms of efficiency. And efficiency is all about service stability. So the measures here are how often changes that you deploy fail, and when they do fail, how long does it take you to recover? And again, we see distinctions here for high, medium, and low performing organizations. So let us know where you rank by answering the poll. Where does your organization perform today? When you deploy a change to production, how often does the process of applying that change fail? Is it less than 15% of the time? Is it less than 30? Is it more than 30? There are some interesting things happening with the numbers in this category, and we'll dive into why medium performance looks like a paradox later in this series. For now, just go ahead and let us know where you rank today. And the other measure to think about is mean time to resolve, or MTTR, right? When things go wrong and failures happen, as they inevitably do, how long does it take you to restore service? Is that time measured in minutes? Is it measured in hours, right? Do you measure that time in days? Unfortunately, sometimes we still do. So where are you today, right? Have you performed in those categories over the last year? And it looks like many of you are already providing a quick estimate on where you stand today, and that's exactly what we're looking for as we move on to the last set of measures here. And the last set of measures here focus on risk. So the measures here are, how often you can assess the state of information security compliance in your applications. And then when you find deviations or vulnerabilities, how long does it take you to deploy a remediation? What industry standard data shows is that high-performing organizations are able to shift the needs of information security to the left, meaning that they think about and assess information security standards at earlier phases of the development process. And there are several ways to do this, but the most effective way is to have your information security policies expressed as executable code. Because if you can, right, then you can, if you automate the assessment of compliance in your applications and your infrastructure automatically, then there's no reason you can't assess that and have that be a part of your software build pipeline as an automatic test. right? Which means that if assessing the state of your compliance is trivial, right, you should be able to assess it on demand. And this is how high performers are able to ship software quickly while maintaining safety, right? There's this old industry myth that you can choose to move quickly or you can choose to move safely, right? That you have to trade off one for the other. But what data shows us is that that assertion just simply isn't true, right? High-performing organizations are able to do both, and this is how. So what does the state of mitigating risk look like in your organization today, right? Can you assess compliance in minutes or hours? Does it take you days or weeks, right? Does it take you months or once a quarter or once a year? Does it happen inconsistently or not at all, right? Where in these distinctions do you land? And where do you think you should be, right? So on top of that, right, when you do discover an irregularity or a vulnerability, like everyone's favorite, OpenSSL, right, how long does it take you to deploy a remediation? Are you able to fix those in minutes? Does it take you days or weeks? Or does it take you months? So think about those statistics, and remember, again, right, you have to perform in all of these categories. So you may have some measures when you start looking at your overall performance that are in the high column and some in the medium and some in the low category. But again, this is a cohesive set of practices. You can't really pick and choose where you decide to outperform your competitors. This is what overall success looks like. So when thinking about your own performance, I would say optimistically, your level of overall performance could be categorized as where you have the most consistent marks, right? In the medium, high, or low performing or category. The pragmatist in me would say it's probably tied to where your lowest marks land, but we'll look at these measures in depth later in the series. But that's the focus of today's webinar. Sorry, my slides are not advancing, but the focus of today's webinar is looking at how we're driving towards outperformance as a competitive edge, right? What does it mean to outperform, and how do you know where you are? You know, what to shoot for, what measures for success align with those of your peers. So the question here is, what if you could not only outperform your own plans, but the plans of your peers? This is what we're going to focus on as we look at the rest of the webinar series. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and spend the rest of the time that we have today focusing on the questions that you have and what your areas of concern are. There's another poll asking you to prioritize your concerns, and we can use that feedback to prioritize our questions as they come in. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and hand it back over to Jamie Bright to moderate our audience questions. And again, if we're unable to get to your questions today, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and I'd love to engage further.
Great, thank you, George. We do have some questions coming through. First question is, are speed, efficiency, and risk the only metrics that matter for success?
I'm glad that question was asked. I would say that a focus on increasing speed, getting better efficiency, and lowering risk are the places to start a transformation initiative. There's a lot that goes into shaping culture and ensuring organizational success. And even when you look at just the standard industry metrics, you'll see that there are other areas of practice that correlate with becoming a high-performance IT organization. For example, how you generate test data or what your continuous integration branching strategies are. So I don't mean to imply that transformation is as simple as these 6 metrics. However, the reality of what I see in the industry being termed as, quote-unquote, transformation initiatives are often poorly defined, or they're scoped inappropriately for the challenges of a particular team. So what I am saying is that these 6 metrics are applicable across the board, right, for most organizations. And they're also an approachable way of getting started. So when you get into them, what I love about those measures and those metrics is that they have a way of reinforcing the behaviors that are ultimately going to be necessary to navigate your way through transformation successfully. So no, that list isn't definitive, but it's a good place to start.
Fantastic. Our next question asks, what are you basing these metrics on? What's the source for these numbers?
So I should be clear that this isn't just Chef software telling you what we think matters. I mean, it is in that it reflects what we've seen in our user base and with our close customer partnerships. But most of these assertions are based on industry metrics that I believe we've noted in the slides if you rewatch this presentation. We're using statistics and numbers from Gartner, Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, the State of DevOps report, and I believe there were a couple of others. I think there were some quotes on the slides from industry leaders like AWS, GE, and the like. But if you go back and you look at the slides, we try to make that all clear where we're pulling this data from.
Great, thank you. This next question, you touched on it a little bit in your first answer, but they're asking, we've heard chefs say that speed is the only dimension that matters, but you're focusing on a lot more than just deployment speed. Are you saying speed isn't the only thing we should be concerned with? Isn't it disrupt or be disrupted?
It is disrupt or be disruptive, right? Or be disrupted. That part is true. And in fact, most of that question is true, right? But let me put it this way, right? How much does speed matter if every time you deploy a change quickly, it tanks your site and you lose users? And it goes back to that myth that I was talking about earlier, right? The belief that you have to trade off between speed and quality, right? Quality meaning efficiency and risk. But that assertion, right, it's just simply not true. You can't ship quickly, but ship software poorly and still manage to outperform and disrupt, right? The only way that shipping quickly actually helps you become successful in the market is if when you make those changes, when you ship software quickly, your users never notice the pains that it took you to do that safely and reliably because you have the rest of those practices ensuring that you're moving without introducing additional risk, right? And it's that balance, it's that is what it means to outperform and become a digital leader.
Well put, George. Looks like we've got time for one more question. Is outperforming my competitors guaranteed by adopting these practices?
So there's a lot that goes into transforming your organization to outperform. And what the data shows is that high-performing organizations that have the types of successes that we're referring to that are highly correlated with organizations that basically they're very highly correlated with the types of data that we covered, right? And adopting those types of practices. So there are a number of factors at play, right? And again, the metrics that we point out are a way to get started and focus in the right direction. But the devil is all in the details, right? And so while these metrics are a good guide, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation or what we here at Chef like to call the operating chasm. And that's basically a place where you shift from being a low-performing organization to being in that high-performing category. And then right in that middle step, there's an opportunity to either scale your practice successfully or just spin your wheels and thrash on different tool sets and thrash on different practices and organizational structures. And that's where there's a variety of advice or misinformation that I believe exists out in the wild, right? That middle category is a place where experimentation and figuring out, what that means for you in particular comes into play. And in that journey, I see cases where customers get it right and cases where they also kind of fall into that dip and fall off into the chasm. And the difference here is having, clear objectives, right? Knowing how to overcome those common organizational struggles. And sometimes it's as simple as having practical experience to draw from so you don't make the same silly mistakes as others on your path. So no, right? Success is not guaranteed, but you're more likely to get there by moving along this path and having a trusted partner to help shepherd you through the process of continuous improvement and understanding, exactly how this plays out for you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the great information, George. We're just about out of time for our first session here today. Before our audience goes, please take a moment to rate this presentation and leave your feedback in the Rate This tab of your viewer screen. Let us know what you thought. about today's presentation. We, of course, hope you found the information valuable, and if you like what you saw, we encourage you to share the recorded presentation with your colleagues or followers. Be sure to register for part 2 of this series, which is focusing on managing risk. It will be presented live in 2 weeks on March 8th, and a link to register can be easily accessed through the Attachments tab of your viewer. Thanks again for your time, and have a wonderful day.